Y'all ready for this? Let's go.
Welcome to the Ben James Smith podcast, a series exploring how capital actually thinks, where it flows, and why the most enduring investment platforms are rarely built by accident. If you joined me for the first episode, we discuss what sophisticated investors truly look for before backing a new platform. Today, I want to go deeper because behind every durable investment firm, behind every allocator that compounds wealth across decades, there is one quiet force almost never discussed outside institutional circles, and that force is governance. Not the kind buried in legal documents, but governance as philosophy, governance as discipline, governance as a creator of long-term advantage. In fact, I would go as far as saying this. In modern private markets, governance is no longer defensive. It is alpha, the misunderstanding most emerging managers have. When new investment platforms are formed, the early energy almost always goes into the same places: the opportunity, the strategy, the projected returns, the pipeline. These things matter, but they are not what sophisticated investors examine first. Experienced allocators are not asking, "How exciting is this?" They are asking something far more important. What protects our capital when things don't go to plan? Because seasoned investors understand a simple truth: returns attract attention, but control frameworks protect capital, and over long time horizons, protection is what creates compounding. A quiet shift inside institutional capital. Over the past decade, something subtle has happened inside investment committees around the world. Governance has moved from a compliance exercise to a primary underwriting factor. Once upon a time, governance was seen as administrative infrastructure. Today, it is viewed as a predictive signal, a signal of how decisions will be made under pressure, a signal of how risk is interpreted, a signal of whether a sponsor is building for durability or momentum, because markets are cyclical. Liquidity comes and goes, but governance determines behavior when conditions tighten, and behavior determines outcomes. Why governance is actually a philosophical choice. At its core, governance is not about committees or reporting lines. It is about mindset. It reflects how a platform answers one defining question: are we building something that must endure, or something that simply needs to work for now? Enduring platforms think differently from the very beginning. They assume scrutiny will come. They assume scale will introduce complexity. They assume capital deserves structure, not personality. And so they build frameworks early, not because they are required, but because they are inevitable. There is a calmness to platforms built this way. You can feel it when you encounter them. Decisions appear measured. Risk feels considered. Growth feels paced rather than chased. Sophisticated investors recognize that feeling instantly. It allows them, quite literally, to sleep at night. The illusion of speed. One of the great temptations in private markets is acceleration. Deploy quickly, scale rapidly, capture opportunity before it disappears. But history teaches a consistent lesson. Platforms rarely fail because they move too slowly. They fail because governance failed to keep pace with the growth. Control structures lag, oversight weakens, decision-making concentrates, and what once looked like momentum reveals itself as fragility. The strongest allocators understand this, which is why increasingly they are drawn toward managers who demonstrate something counterintuitive: restraint. Restraint signals discipline. Discipline signals repeatability. Repeatability signals institutional potential. Governance as the creator of trust. Trust is an interesting concept in investment management. It is rarely declared, but constantly evaluated. And governance is how trust becomes tangible. Independent oversight, clear reporting, defined decision rights, transparency in both success and setback. These are not bureaucratic exercises. They are trust mechanisms. When present, they reduce uncertainty. And when uncertainty falls, capital becomes patient. Patient capital is transformative. It allows platforms to think in decades rather than quarters, to prioritize quality over velocity, to play what I often call the long game, the platforms that endure. If you study investment firms that have compounded across generations, a pattern emerges. They are rarely the loudest, rarely the most promotional, rarely the fastest growing in their earliest years. But they share a defining trait. They institutionalized themselves early, before they needed to, before investors demanded it, before scale forced it upon them. They behaved like enduring firms, long before they were recognized as such. And over time, capital noticed, because sophisticated allocators are not searching for excitement. They are searching for permanence. Governance is not a constraint, it's liberation. There is a misconception that governance slows organizations down. In reality, strong governance does the opposite. It removes ambiguity, it clarifies authority, it creates decision-making confidence. When frameworks are clear, teams move faster, not slower. More importantly, they move coherently. And coherence is what allows platforms to scale without losing identity. Without governance, growth creates noise. With governance, growth creates structure. Structure compounds. Noise does not. A personal reflection. The more time I spend observing how sophisticated capital behaves, the more convinced I become of a simple idea. Great platforms are designed, not improvised. They are intentional about alignment, intentional about oversight, intentional about risk, because they recognize something many overlook. Capital is never just financial, it is emotional. Behind every allocation sits responsibility to pensioners, families, endowments, institutions. When you truly internalize that, governance stops feeling procedural. It starts feeling ethical, almost philosophical, a commitment to stewardship rather than merely performance. Where this leaves us. As private markets continue to mature, I believe governance will become one of the defining differentiators between platforms that scale and platforms that stall, between those trusted with repeat allocations and those remembered as promising but unproven. In many ways, the next generation of investment firms will not be defined solely by strategy, but by the seriousness with which they build their operating foundations. Because ultimately, performance attracts capital once, governance attracts it again, and again, and again. That is how endurance is built. Thank you for joining me for today's discussion. If this episode resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe to the podcast, where we continue to explore how capital really thinks and what it takes to build investment platforms designed not just for opportunity, but for longevity. In our next episode, we will examine another quiet driver of enduring firms, alignment between sponsor and investor, and why true alignment is far rarer than most assume. Until then, remember, markets reward intelligence, but over time, they entrust capital to discipline. Until next time, thank you for listening. Speak soon.